in terms of learning to think and learning to learn new things at a rapid pace, I think it's difficult to find a substitute for classical Christian education. The issue with classical Christian education is not that it doesn't work. The issue is that it works too well.
John, thank you so much for joining me on A Flames and Crowns today. I'm really excited that you actually get to be with me today. You're definitely someone I've been looking forward to meeting and getting to know, and the fact that we get to do this on camera now is just incredible. So thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah,
Glad to
so
be here.
let's talk a bit about your background, and we'll kind of get into a rabbit hole here on so many levels. Sure. But where'd you grow up? How'd you grow up? And eventually find yourself at New St. Andrews College?
Yeah, that's a great question. I grew up in Dallas, and very grateful for my parents, who always brought us to church, and for them, the Christian faith was very important. And so we always had that as our background. And then we had, a number of friends and other people speaking into our lives, which they were all very influential. We started going to a Presbyterian church, Park Cities Presbyterian in Dallas, my sort of middle school, and then into our senior year, and that really transformed me and also our family. And there was a youth pastor there who was familiar with Doug Wilson and what was going on up here. And at that time, I got very interested in theology. And fortunately, I had him as a mentor and pointing me into the good stuff, reading Calvin and other stuff. And so I began reading some of the professors up here and enjoying that. And then I think it was an ad in Credenda where I saw there was a college, which was exciting because I saw the book list, and I felt like at the time, as I was going into college, I was thinking that I wanted to go and be an academic or perhaps a pastor. And so the idea of getting to sink my teeth into those books, on a regular basis was exciting. So that's how, and then I came up and visited and got excited when I came up here. And so that's kind of how I found about how.
That's amazing. And this is, I suppose, early 2000s.
Yes. I'm even older than that.
Yeah, okay. Wow.
late 90s.
This is late 90s, right.
My senior year would have been 99 to 2000. So around that time. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah. I guess there's some people who always ask themselves the question, like, should I go to college? It doesn't sound like that. So it doesn't sound like that was ever a question in your mind. You knew what you wanted to do. You had academic aspirations at the time. That's right.
I don't think college was a question, but it was a question of where I would go to college, what would I study, that sort of thing.
Right. And then showing up to New St. Andrews College, did it meet your expectations at all? Exceed your expectations? How was it for you?
I didn't quite know what to expect, but I think when I came up here, one of the things that was striking was already the amount of impact Moscow was having outside of Moscow. Yes. And what was striking to me about that was how ordinary Moscow was, how small it was. Even Canon Press at the time was walking to kind of one room, in a building that shared other office space. And I think New St. Andrews was different than what I thought. I was confident that I would get an incredible education if I went to New St. Andrews. But I went to public school and I thought I knew how to have fun and could rent a movie and go to Taco Bell but that quickly, as I came, I learned how fun really happened. So
sure. Yeah, absolutely. Doing Latin recitations and all kinds of things. It's a busy time out here.
It was a busy time, but it was funny because the professors were even often the ones leading the charge in the fun department. We had a number of professors who were, cracking jokes and, hanging out on Friday nights and playing the guitar. And so it was fun.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things I love about NSA culture is just actually having real relationships with faculty, where they're not just instructors, they're really mentors. They're people who really do come alongside you in life. And I really love that about the college. Do you recall what your favorite class was, or at least some class that really left an impression on you in a significant way?
It would be hard to choose, but the one that stands out was my freshman rhetoric class. And at the time, that was taught by Doug Wilson, and we learned so much. It was hilarious because we started our first recitation was, or I think they were declamations because it was rhetoric class, was getting up in front of the entire class and reading Winnie the Pooh. And you would think that that's sort of something maybe like, an elementary school student could do, but we were all frightened, we were scared. And then, that led to doing poems and having debates, impromptu with someone about, is the sky blue? And you had to take a side. And so that one was huge. And I think part of it was to the community and the community with the professor and the ongoing dialogue and learning that. And rhetoric is such a distinctive class relative to, the public school that I had gone to or other typical college classes.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. So of course now you've been in the world of business for a while.
Right.
Had many ventures and adventures, and I want to get into the weeds of all of that.
Sure.
But just what was life like for you in the immediate aftermath of graduating from NSA?
Yeah. Well, so I went to Nashville. I was there for a year. I did a Master's of Science in Finance at Vanderbilt. And that would have probably been my immediate aftermath. I loved it. I loved finance. I loved investment. I was very curious about it. I really dove in. But that was the first time of really interacting with, outside of the NSA environment from an academic standpoint, and particularly in the business world.
So that's interesting. So going into NSA, you had academic pastoral interests. You find yourself at Vanderbilt now. What changed in that time?
Yeah. It was interesting because going to NSA, I actually had a number of people whom I respect warning me against the narrowness of the education, that, okay, you're going to a school, it's only going to have one major. It's a very narrow, limiting thing. And my experience was quite the opposite and has been since then. But the first piece that changed was going from, thinking business was just a completely worthless pursuit to becoming very interested in it. My dad, when I was considering New St. Andrews, was helping me think through it. And I said, Dad, like, help me think through. It's like, what concerns do you have? What am I missing? And he said, John, what if you want to do business? And I chimed back really quickly. I didn't miss a beat. And I said, Dad, I can guarantee you I will never want to do business. Yeah. So going into NSA, I viewed business as worthless and boring and maybe just making money, sure, that sort of thing. And New St. Andrews, instilled in me this understanding of God's creation and that it includes all these different areas, gardening and business and law. And so I became very interested eventually in business. And I had this deep desire to go build something, to go create and compete and invest. And so that's how I got interested in business, coming from that, initial step.
Yeah. All of Christ for all of life.
Right.
For all of business.
Right.
For all of everything, right?
Right.
That's
truth, goodness, and beauty applies not just to, some narrow subset.
Yeah, exactly. So now you're at Vanderbilt. How did that go for you? Did you enjoy that season of your life?
I loved it. I think, it feels like for me, and we've seen this with the New St. Andrews graduates, there's always the ability to tack on, professional whatever, the training or credentials after NSA. And so that was my experience at Vanderbilt. I loved it. It was initially challenging because, I had to catch up a little bit to undergraduate business majors and people who'd been taking more math than I had and so forth. And so I definitely worked hard sort of in orientation in that first quarter, but it was interesting because the point at which I caught up to the undergraduate business majors was at the end of the first quarter. And so from that point on, we were really on equal footing, except we weren't exactly on equal footing because I had this very strong liberal arts background where I had been trained to think and learn quickly. And so the next 3 quarters were far more dependent on that than they were, what anyone brought to the table at that point.
Yeah. Sounds like you had quite an advantage in that sense, actually. I guess just the fact that you already had a work ethic that was developed at New St. Andrews College, maybe even before, you come into this world where you can understand business, but with the foundation of having a broad understanding of how the world works, I suppose. I suppose
think
that must have made you stand out to some degree.
I think so. And I think my experience at New St. Andrews was a few things. One is some sort of professional training or credentials didn't limit us at New St. Andrews. It didn't limit us from diving into Herodotus or writing a senior thesis. And so at NSA, we went quickly from subject to subject, which often a new subject would be a completely different environment, having to very quickly understand the grammar of that subject, what's important, what's not important. And, I think that is what Dorothy Sayers calls the art of learning, in her essay. And so the ability to quickly learn and that compounding over time has been significant.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. The one way I can relate to, I went to business school.
Okay, yeah.
Got a business degree. My foundation before then was Christian, largely classical education as well.
Right.
And it was interesting. I think in my experience, there were some things that felt very different. It was just a new method of learning and teaching. But I realized that I could learn and adapt much quicker to things. And that definitely gave me some kind of advantage. But it's actually, in my case, I think it's one of those things I only learned to appreciate much later in life, honestly, than, right there and then. So what was life for you right after Vanderbilt? What happens then?
Right. Well, I got a job at a subsidiary of Goldman Sachs called Archon Group, and then later it folded into Goldman. So I launched into a real estate private equity career of investing in real estate, and that led to being at Goldman for 15 years.
Amazing. Yeah, 15 years. That's a good amount of time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Was it a good experience for you? Do you enjoy your time there?
I did. Yeah. I loved it because similar to New St. Andrews and Vanderbilt, Goldman was a very rigorous environment. So it was intellectually challenging and stimulating, working with very high quality people and getting to do a lot of different things, invest in different types of real estate, investing in different real estate companies, and ultimately spent time really honing a real estate investment strategy that I've leveraged even past Goldman. But I loved being there.
Okay, that's great. I want to come back into that and just kind of get into some of those details. So you moved on from Goldman. What are you doing now? Is what you're doing now the thing that you jumped into when you left Goldman?
Yes, I co-founded a real estate company 3.5 years ago with a partner of mine who we were at Goldman together. I have an incredible partner, and so that has been a great adventure.
Yeah, that's incredible. So let's say there's a young man who is in many ways walking in the same path that you're walking in.
Right.
He's maybe getting into college now. He's ambitious. is picking up an interest in business, what would you tell this young man as far as just necessary ingredients to be successful in all the ways that you've been successful, to be masterful, to be competent in the world of business and private equity?
Sure. I think there are really, I could probably boil it down to three things. And that's not an exhaustive list, but certainly those three things are very important. I think the first thing is to develop the ability to learn on your own at a very rapid pace. And I think that quality is very important. We can go deep on that. I think the second thing is the ability to, it's essentially rhetoric. It's the ability to talk with people, convince, articulate ideas, both in a one-on-one context, all the way from, hey, I'm dealing with a coworker or I'm dealing with an investor, to a broader group, or painting a picture for a vision for a company. And then I think the third thing, which is hard to get around, is grit. And, oftentimes it's not the people who have the most talent who end up winning. It's the people who keep showing up day in, day out when it gets hard. And I think those three things are really important.
What do you think it takes to nurture those things?
Well, I think in terms of learning to think and learning to learn new things at a rapid pace, I think it's difficult to find a substitute for classical Christian education. Right. And I think that the issue with classical Christian education is not that it doesn't work. The issue is that it works too well. And I think one of the biggest, one of the issues that I see is parents and students leaving money on the table along the way. And so there are middle schools who advertise themselves as, hey, if you go through our middle school program, your student can be a top high schooler somewhere and get into the right college. Or, hey, through our high school program, almost like a prep school approach, you can get into the right college. And anyway, we could go deep there. I think a lot of that is addressed in Excellent Sheep. We're talking about sort of, how the American culture believes in this sort of very linear path to an outcome when it's just not that case. And then rhetoric, or the ability to convince people, I think being in an environment where you're having to do that. And again, classical Christian education does that. You see that even from very young ages. At New St. Andrews, you see that in a way that I think is hard to replicate. And then grit, I think, is, we could go deep there, but Angela Duckworth, she has a book called Grit, which is fairly interesting, but she points to two things. One is having a passion, and then also a perseverance towards pursuing long-term goals. And that's best cultivated in environments where there are very high standards, but also where there are peers, mentor, there's support to achieve those high standards.
Yeah, it's incredible. What does it look like for you at this stage of your career, at this stage of your life, to continue to make sure that all those things are well nurtured and polished? What does learning look like for you at this stage? What does grit look like for you at this stage? What does making sure you are sharp in your communication look like at this stage of your career?
Right.
Because I'd imagine it's not just a subscription that you make once upon a time and you kind of just, let it go. There's a sense in which everything that you continue to do in your business demands these inputs specifically. What does that look like for you now?
Yeah, and the interesting thing is it is different, and then it's also the same as it was when I started freshman year at NSA. Right. We read a lot. And I still read a lot. Sure. And Charlie Munger, who was Warren Buffett's longtime partner and easily one of the most successful investors in the 20th century, describes the best way to learn business is reading business biographies. And so that sounds very similar to an approach, that we did at NSA. But I think constantly reading and being intellectually curious and playing with ideas, the business world, and I don't think academics quite understand this, but the business world feels very similar to me to the academic world. Much of what I have done for a long time has been to try to identify patterns that other people don't see, or play with things that work in this realm and import it into another realm. Right. And so that process definitely does not stop. I think in terms of rhetoric, you're constantly on a pursuit there. I think one of the latest things that I've been playing with has been, there was a book called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. And so he was an FBI negotiator and basically importing that into all sorts of scenarios in the business world, et cetera. And it really has, in a lot of ways, displaced negotiation theory from, say, 15, 20 years ago, which was really the framework was in a book called Getting to Yes. And he has really sort of taken center stage with that. But to get good at it is not obvious. And so I personally, and then at our company, have been looking for ways to train in that and get good at that. And ultimately, that is rhetoric. That is sitting across from one person or several people, convincing them of your ideas, which is very similar to negotiating a deal. And so you're constantly playing with that. And then I think grit is, I don't know, that's a great question. I'm not sure, other than being in environments where there are high standards and support. I think that's probably the key to that, and over time making sure you're in that sort of scenario.
I mean, I think to do what you do requires quite a lot. I mean, I assume you're very busy, generally speaking. There's a lot on your plate. You've got a family as well, as I understand. So the demands on your time are pretty significant. What are those inputs that no one sees? What are the inputs that no one sees are necessary for you to do what you're able to do? I mean, I think if there's a lesson that I'm learning in my life at the moment, is just the necessity of just staying healthy, and that actually being a necessary requirement for me to just show up and do well and pursue excellence.
Sure.
Making sure I'm in consistent covenant fellowship with God's people, right. Ensuring that I'm praying consistently, I'm in Sure. God's word consistently. Sure. Just making sure that those foundational things are well aligned. I'd even say just making sure that my family is well taken care of, and that I'm winning where it matters most. Winning at home too. I suppose what are those things in your life that ground you and enable you to do everything?
Gosh, that's a good question. I think that our church community has been huge.
Yes.
And making sure as a family that we're at a church where we can worship well, where we can be in community with other people, where going with the grain looks like being faithful for our kids. And so we've been very grateful. We have a great church community in Dallas. We also have a great school community for them. They attend a classical Christian school in Dallas, and we've been really grateful for that. That it's hard to, understate the impact of that, of teachers that we would be happy if our children became like, and pouring into our children. And Naomi, my wife, is a third grade teacher there, and she's great at that. So I think when I think about, I think I think Doug Wilson once said, major on the majors, minor on the minors. So those things would be kind of in the major category for me.
Yeah.
And then I think reading the Bible and praying.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because sometimes I think people in general, and maybe even a student going into college might struggle with a bit of an ego. Maybe even learning some good things and then feeling like, hey, I know things. I am not really concerned about someone having that same ego 10 years after college or 20 years after college, because I think life has a way of convincing you that you're not in control of everything. And so I think that makes reading your Bible and praying even more important, having that connection to God, and really in a way that is recognizing your dependence.
Right.
And so if you live life long enough, I think that happens, and that is important. And then I think I read a lot.
Yeah.
And I read a lot of different things. I do love business biographies, but I read other things, and I also do Audible as well. Some of that's reading, some of that's Audible. And then I think exercising is important.
Yeah.
I need to do that more.
Yeah.
I love learning languages.
Okay.
I'm not great at any of the languages that I've learned, but
I was about to have you demonstrate something for us.
maybe some Portuguese or something.
Yeah, right.
But I think, and then I think community and fellowship.
Yeah.
With other believers.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. I'm always just curious to know what people's methods are like. Just still tied on that, what does the management of your time look like? Like,
Right.
what are your usual rhythms? Daily, weekly, monthly? Is there a consistency to them? Is your routine often unpredictable? Just what does that look like in your world?
Yeah, that's a great question. I tend to try to dial it in as much as I can. So I'm typically waking up and reading my Bible and praying, and then exercising, and then coming back and eating breakfast, getting ready for the day. And then one thing that has been helpful for me as a tool is probably a simplified method of time blocking. And so I'll typically start by just trying to identify the 3 most important things for the day. If I didn't get anything else done, what would those 3 things be?
That's good.
And trying to do those things as early as possible.
Yeah.
And then a lot, can change. The day can get chaotic, but if I'm able to knock those out early, then, and typically those things aren't difficult.
Yeah. Sure.
But there are things that, as a human being, you're inclined to maybe put off till later. Sure. Maybe they're a little bit harder. And so I think developing that muscle is important. And so that's what the flow of the day looks like in meetings, and trying to do as much sort of independent work as possible, and then rolling into dinner time with the family.
Yeah. That's very good. I kind of try that method as well. Just 3 things that I want to sign off.
Right.
Every single day. If I do more than that, then great. But
Right.
Generally, those 3 things. I usually try to set it like the night before,
Yes.
and then that way I know exactly what I'm getting into the next day. Like, how far in advance would you be trying to plan those kinds of things?
I'll typically try to time block my day
Okay.
at the end of the day
Okay.
prior,
Yeah.
and I've gotten fairly consistent with it.
Yeah.
I think if I'm able to, and I think this is something that applies to business and all sorts of things. If I'm able to spend even a short time just thinking,
Sure.
then I'm able to dedicate the next day to executing without having to think between things. So I think, a lot of people lose time when they'll knock out one thing and then, okay, what should I do next? But if I'm able to spend a bit of time saying, okay, these are the most important, then, okay, I need to kind of leave time for this, then I can, sometimes surprise myself moving through things.
Yeah. That's very good. Yeah, I try to, my methods generally, I try to plan weekly and I review daily. And
Oh, okay,
just
that's great.
try to hit it that way.
And sometimes it goes out the
and
window.
sometimes that's exactly what it is. But I think what helps is just having it on my schedule to kind of circle back to it, because things do happen that just derail absolutely everything. Yeah. What does family time look like for you in all of that?
Yeah.
What are you trying to do with your kids these days, especially?
Let's see. We tend to eat dinner together, which I think is a good sort of home base rhythm for us. And then my kids now are in middle school and high school, so it looks different than when they were growing up. They have activities, and now obviously I have a freshman in college, so that's a little bit different. That will change our home dynamic. And then our second oldest one can drive, and but I think we try to eat together as a really central part of our rhythm, and then going to church together. And then I have extended family, my parents, and I grew up with 4 grandparents in Dallas and brothers and their families. And so we're able to get together with them as well. And then, gosh, there's not sort of a prescribed program here, but I think I want to have experiences with my children where I'm able to impart to them things that I look back and find very valuable, and I'm able to do that early and hopefully often in a way that it doesn't feel contrived.
Yeah, that's good.
So that takes a lot of different forms. But my son, for example, our lawnmower broke, and so he was like, "Dad, I think I can fix that." I was like, "Okay, go for it.
Yeah.
What do you need? And let's get you set up." And the reality is he did most of that figuring it out, and got to the point where it was able to start again. And actually there was a leak, so it then didn't work. Right. But I think creating the space for things like that.
Yeah.
And it's not always sort of prescribed, right?
Sure. Yeah, I really like that. An interesting question. If you could go back 25 years and talk to John Lewis, what would you want him to know then that you now know now?
Right.
Important things that you've learned over the years that you wish you could have learned when you were younger.
Right. I think that, and I would say this to other people, not just John Lewis's, not just little John Lewis's, but I would encourage people, especially if someone's looking to make a dent, make an impact, to aim higher, and aim higher more quickly, and take risks. Because I think that I've loved what I've been up to and everything that I've done, but I think I spent a long time trying to figure out how to be in a spot where I'm launching with my partner to co-found our business. Yeah. And it all played out the way that it should have. But I think Bezos makes this comment, people tend to overestimate risk, and underestimate their ability to figure it out. So oftentimes people approach problems from the standpoint of, what are all the things that I would have to do in order to get to, so let's say from A to B, right? And then what are all the risk points along the way? Mm-hmm. And when you do that, it actually reads similar to, I think there was a common book called like What to Expect When You're Expecting. Yeah. And it's like, there's 1,000 ways that pregnancy can go wrong, but the reality is most people give birth and it goes well. And so I think business is actually the same way, is you can sort of identify all those points of risk, but you could also say, well, for other people who've tried this, how has it gone? Sure. What have been ways that it has gotten derailed? Okay, this is a common way that it gets derailed, and then you can protect against that and not have to worry about the infinite number of things, along the way. So I think I would say, I would encourage myself to move faster and take more risks and be a bit bolder.
Take more risks. I love that. Do you think that we suffer from that as Christians sometimes? Like where we fear being so wrong.
Oh,
right. Like we fear taking a wrong step, believing a wrong thing. I don't know. Just so many on 100%. So many, and that makes us just very risk averse by and large. One of the things I've been trying to harp on in the last couple of years is the necessity of ambition as a distinct Christian virtue.
Oh.
And the necessity of people actually getting up there and doing something.
Right.
Doesn't matter what it is. It could be business. It could be law. It could be whatever it is.
Right.
But actually trying to do audacious things. My backing for this is I can't think of anything more ambitious than the cultural mandate or the Great Commission. Sure. Right? It doesn't get more ambitious than that. Exercising dominion over the earth,
right?
Discipling the nations, like that's some pretty big stuff.
Right.
And I think that requires people who are willing to go out there and do daring things, people who are willing to take risks. How do people exercise that muscle? Like, well, what does it take to be the kind of person who's not ruled by fear, ruled by this idea of convenience and survival, and is actually willing to go after it and get something done, start a business?
Right.
What does that take to get to a point where you're at least, might never feel fully comfortable, but at least you're at a point where you're comfortable enough to still plow forward?
Right.
What does that take?
Where you're not frozen.
Exactly, where you're not frozen.
And I think the reality is you never get comfortable.
Sure.
And you'd probably think the same thing, but you get comfortable with feeling uncomfortable. Right. Yeah. And look, I think Winston Churchill said success is going from one failure to another without any loss of enthusiasm. And in the business world, Charlie Munger says business is problems, and the more you get comfortable with that, and not think that it's a result of doing something wrong, but that it's part of the process, and the more you get comfortable with that, sort of the more successful you'll be. I think you hit on a really important thing. Even I think about Hebrews 11 with the people who are listed, in the Hall of Faith,
right.
And none of those people could you look at it and be like, oh, this was pristine.
Exactly.
I mean, even today, if any of these figures were to live, they would be criticized and all sorts of things. But yet they accomplished things that in God's economy were very important. And I think you hit on something really important. And I think probably the first thing is for people to have a vision of what's possible. And I see that with business, and even people thinking about getting into business and, oh, I have to have the right connections, or I have to have a business degree or whatever. And, how many incredible businessmen in the history of business didn't start out with connections,
exactly,
or didn't start out with money, or didn't start out with business degrees. And so I see people falling back onto these crutches that they think are important when that's not what moves someone from here to here. And I think part of it is just being exposed to those examples of what's possible. So for business, if someone were thinking about getting into business, I would say, why could you not become a billionaire? Now, I say that, and the point of that is not to accumulate wealth and have it sitting on the shelf somewhere. Whether someone's a billionaire or not is important, is not important. But it emphasizes the level that I'm talking about playing at. And any student at New St. Andrews has the ability to do that. And so I think, and we are exposed to great historical figures. And so I think that's probably the first thing is encouraging people to aim high, not low. And that sounds a bit cheesy, but I think people tend to overestimate what they can accomplish in a short period of time,
Yeah.
right? And underestimate what's possible over
Yeah.
a long period of time.
Oh, absolutely. I think there is a correlation between expectation and outcomes in that sense. I think when we lower the bar for ourselves or even for other people, we're likely not to hit it, you know?
Right.
And so perhaps if we raised the expectation and actually believed, yeah, it's possible
Right.
that this can be done, I think we'd absolutely hit that.
Yeah, and I think a big piece of that too is, right, Proverbs says we become like our friends.
Absolutely.
Right? And so I think you've hit on a key piece there is I would encourage people to find friends, find community where, you know, extraordinary things are kind of normal.
That's so good.
And
Exactly.
I think that what someone would find is not so much that creates this huge pressure to achieve, but they may actually find that it actually reduces pressure, and that it helps people to understand what's possible.
Yeah, that's very good. Like just actually who your friends are.
I think so.
Really matters for all of this, the people that you spend time with. And I suppose that even goes beyond friends. It's the kind of things we consume in our entertainment. It's, you know, what are we listening to?
Right.
What are the things that have the biggest say about my thoughts and affections?
Right.
Like, because those are ultimately the things that are going to determine what I do and how I live. That's very insightful. As far as culture building goes, I'm interested to just know what culture looks like within your company. Like how much do you think about the kind of culture you're building in-house? What are those core pillars, so to speak, that you're seeking to establish that govern how you work, how you relate, all of that?
Yeah. Well,
And I say it because you strike me as the kind of person who would think about these kinds of things. So yeah.
we're very intentional. I would say Beamreach is not a Christian company. I have co-founders who aren't Christians and partners, and that's okay. But I would say all of what we've been talking about bleeds into, with that same intentionality. I want a great culture for our business. In fact, we have, as part of our 3-year target, having a very strong culture. I'm smiling because we call it something a little bit different. Yeah. But I think the first way that it shows up is being intentional about how we even run the business. Right. And this is where, I think even sort of the NSA background comes into play, because there's this book called Range, Why Generalists Thrive in a World of Specialists by David Epstein. Yeah. And he describes, two kinds of environments. One he calls a kind environment, which is like, think bowling a bowling ball, where nothing changes. It's the same motion over and over. And then a wicked environment is variables change, the rules aren't clear, feedback isn't perfect and immediate. And most of the world is that second environment. And so, it would be surprising to realize how many businessmen don't know how to run a business effectively. Yeah. So we were faced with that even at the outset, and wanting to nail that piece, because we were real estate investors and good at that, but we had to get good at running a company, and a company that could execute, but do it in a way that other people love being a part of that. And so we've spent a lot of time and effort on getting good at that. And and culture is a big piece of that too.
Yeah. I think that's really become a real passion of mine. I just see the importance of culture for business success. I've had the opportunities to lead cultures. One of my previous jobs was literally just trying to actually develop a distinct work culture as well.
Sure.
And that involved many different things. I don't think every single institution is going to look the same in terms of how it builds that. But one of the things that I would consistently gravitate to is making sure that we're all like-minded. And that often meant okay, are we learning the same things?
Sure.
Right. So I wanted to make sure that we're investing in people's learning, in their education. Like there's just no escaping that.
Sure.
And I think just beyond that, trying to maybe focus a lot on the relational aspects as well, but also just setting real tangible targets that people can rally around, and having a very clear vision of how you can actually realize those goals. Do you have any specific hacks or things that you figured work in building culture at that sort of strategic level? How do you bring a team together towards a common goal and pursue excellence together? What does that look like?
So we do, and I do. I would say one thing that's been very influential for us in taking steps to build a great company has been implementing in our business a system called EOS, which is called Entrepreneurial Operating System. It really started with a book called Traction by Gino Wickman. And really, to distill it down, it's about hyper simplifying your business so that you can grow and scale. Right. And it's about doing really the small subset of things that you just listed that keep you high functioning. So for example, how can people follow you and execute successfully within a company if they don't know where it's going? Right. So getting really clear on what the vision is. What does it look like to win? And then to the extent you define that, then you can get everybody rowing in the same direction behind that. Yes. There's a quote, Patrick Lencioni, that is, if you can get all the people in an organization rowing in the same direction, you can dominate in any market, in any industry at any time. And that's really about harnessing all of people, like all the capabilities within the team that you have, but getting laser focused on what you're trying to accomplish. So to the extent you don't have that clarity, it's very hard to hit that goal. I think Doug Wilson said somewhere, we aim for nothing and we hit it every time. Yeah. So the first step is to get really clear about what you're aiming for.
Yeah, so good. In a way, like what you and I are kind of describing now are important tenets of leadership.
Right.
Right. Like that's a core thing. And you're a leader. You're very much that. What have you found have been the most important ingredients for effective leadership in this present cultural climate? Right. Like, so there's a sense in which the world's gone through a lot.
Right.
Right. We've had to navigate DEI quotas. We've had to navigate COVID. We've had to navigate just multiple things all at once.
Right.
And I think even another dynamic to it is having to navigate people coming from different backgrounds, which is just true about business for all of time.
Sure.
Like, what does leadership look like? What does it take for someone to harness the reins of the present moment, have a vision,
right,
and get people to follow him towards that goal? Right.
I think a few thoughts. What comes to mind first is Steve Martin, the comic, wrote. He has an autobiography called Born Standing Up, and he's famously quoted in that, and it runs throughout the book. This idea of being so good that they can't ignore you. Right. And I think, when I think of that, I also think about anti-fragile, that concept, Nassim Taleb. And I think that's really important, is that throughout history and even today, you see companies performing at such a high level that there's some amount of insulation from the cultural craziness that has been going on. And, people still love sandwiches at Chick-fil-A. And that's really hard to ignore, regardless of their political views or the faith of the founders. And so I think that's important, is being undeniably good at something. And then, I think in terms of bringing people along the way, it is, we talked about vision. I think that's very important. Yeah. Painting that in such a way that people can see it, understand it, and want to be a part of it. And, creating a place where there are high expectations, where people who have high expectations thrive, and doing it in a way that's fair and clear, and that it's generous and kind, and a culture people want to be a part of.
Yeah, that's very good. John, as you see the culture in America at the moment, what are the things that concern you most, and what would you like to see happen to address those things?
Yeah, wow, that's good. I think that it feels like a little bit old-fashioned to say this, but I think that there has been this departure from logic, and maybe a long time ago. So what does that mean? Okay. I think logic is important, and then maybe even more important than logic is rhetoric, being able to communicate in ways that will resonate with people, that is almost sort of outside of the box of a syllogism. Right. And I think we see examples of that. But really what I would love to see are Christian organizations spanning across industries, spanning across all the way from things from nonprofits to business to art, excelling in a way that it's hard for people to ignore that. I think this is, I'm not speaking of this as an example of a Christian organization, but you think about SpaceX recently, and Elon Musk spat with Donald Trump. Yeah. And then when Donald Trump goes and look at the SpaceX contracts, he realizes he can't cancel any of those, right? And so I think that there's an opportunity for Christians to build organizations, educational organizations, nonprofit organizations, business education organizations, spanning across multiple fields, and do it in a way that it's hard for people to resist.
Right. That's so good.
I think that's where the action is being constructive in a way that the church has been for a very long time, but maybe we have been lacking in examples recently.
Sure. Yeah. Interesting how it kind of goes back to being enterprising, right? And
I think so.
That's the way to win a culture. I think it's going to require nothing less.
And then there are examples of all sorts of people throughout history where the starting point has looked weak, right, has looked like it was a bit hopeless, and who have moved and accomplished things to get to those points where they have created an institution that is doing really incredible things. And I think we have that opportunity too.
That's special. John, I think I could talk to you all day. There's so much to pick from there. There's so much I think I've learned from everything that you've said today. But as we end this, we got to end with a toast. So, all right, anything that you'd like to toast to specifically?
Yeah, I'd like to toast to the college.
Okay. Yes, to New St. Andrews College.
To New St. Andrews College, whom God has blessed despite its super small beginning, and for which I'm grateful, and which is making an impact.
Cheers.
Cheers.